Who got what? It's up to you guys. You're married to each other. I'm not going to get in between that.
Well, he said, go ahead. So I'll do it and I'll let him have the last word, which doesn't happen very often, let me tell you. So the only thing I have to watch out for is that I leave him enough time, because I can, I'm not one of those Al-Anons who doesn't have a lot to say. I got a lot to say and I have no problem saying it. So there you are. So my name is Juanita, and I am a very grateful member of the Worldwide Fellowship of Al-Anon. And there's a few people I know who are on here, and it's great to see you. And thanks, Yvonne, for asking us. And, what a great service this is doing for Al-Anon worldwide. So thank you for that. And what a gift that this is now going to be, what you're doing is going to be on ASL, which is absolutely fantastic as well, because that's a community that has been sorely neglected in many ways. So thank you, and Joe and Billy and Debbie and everyone who has worked and is working so hard to help us carry this message that we do, around the world, and much more so in the last several months than ever before, I believe. So when Yvonne, was asking about us doing this, and she was, well, what are we going to call it? And I said, well, one of my favorite pieces of Al-Anon literature, the one probably that is the favorite from the longest, is from August 18th. And she read it and she said, well, I don't know what that means. And because years ago I was doing a workshop at home, a step workshop, and we were probably at inventory. I can't remember what it was, but one of the gals said, well, I have a ledger. And we go, what do you mean you have a ledger? And she says, I have a ledger. She says, we said, well, what do you do on the ledger? And she said, well, on the ledger, she says, one side of the book is the good things that her husband had done for her. Yeah. And there was a line in the middle of the page. And on one side was the good things he'd done. And the other side was the things that he hadn't done, or the things how he'd hurt her. And the other side of the page were things that she had done that were really, for him, really helpful as far as she was concerned. And the other things she'd done to her. And but the thing is, I've got already like on my 4th or 5th journal since we've been married, because, his side gets so filled up quickly on how he's hurt me. And so I keep having to start new journals. And so when I remember reading this page shortly afterwards, and my favorite piece is at the bottom on August 18th of the One Day at a Time. It says, the horror of that moment, the king said, I shall never, never forget. You will, though, said the queen, if you don't make a memorandum of it. And that's from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. And it just reminds me that how many times before coming into Al-Anon, and I can still do this today, that I make a memorandum of how I believe you have hurt me, how I believe the alcoholic has hurt me. And it's just, I think I'll never forget it. And whenever I get into that, which is me telling my story, I am so tied to that I always go back to the negative, and I'm never paying attention to the positive and the good things that are in my life and that surround me. So the horror of the moment, and it's like the queen says, you will, though, if you don't make a memorandum of it. So, I want to tell you that I grew up in a family where there was active alcoholism. My dad was a drinker, and I think he was kind of a binge drinker, mostly weekends on the days he was off. But, what do I know? I have no idea. And I got married to, when I was 17, I was pregnant, and he was 19. And neither of us were ready for marriage. And I tell you this because one of the things that happened was he was not an alcoholic. He had a problem with substances, and he loved to take whatever it was. And there were a couple of instances where he had to go into the emergency room and stay in the hospital, because of what he took. And I remember, asking him, why did you take those things? What were you thinking? How come you did that? And he said, I don't know. I don't know. And it just baffled me. It just didn't make sense to me. I don't get it. And I don't get it because that's not who I am. That's not what I do. That's not what I use. I use my relationships with the alcoholics or the addicts, however that may be. And so anyway, we were divorced within 3 years. And then I had numerous other relationships. And then came that day, October 1st of 1977. Was that 77? 1977, when I met Tom. And he was, it was a wedding that neither one of us was going to go to. And we both went. And I saw him standing outside the cathedral in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I thought, well, he's pretty cute. He looks pretty well put together. And I thought, that looks pretty good. And so I became instantly interested. And I found out all about him and the places he liked to hang out. And I proceeded to go to many of those places. And you won't believe this, but those places were primarily bars. Go figure, And so I showed up for the next 3 weeks at these bars, and I'd see him a couple of times a week. And finally, about the fourth time that I saw him at one of these places, he looked at me and he said, he said, I've known members of your family for years. We've had the same friends and for years, and we've never met. He said, and all of a sudden, here's this wedding, and now I see you all the time. And he said, I think this must be fate. And I said, yeah, I think it must be fate. No, I was a stalker. Long before I was wondering where he was because he was drinking, I stalked him to get him. And clearly, it's been 41 years now that we've been together. And but I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you the story because this tells you how the family disease of alcoholism progressed for me in my life. I could give up that first husband because our life was crazy. I could give him up because he wasn't working. That was what I thought was the most important thing. He wasn't working. He wasn't bringing in money. So I gave that one up. I could take it or leave it at that point. By the time I met Tom, and I met him just before I turned 24, I remember we were together for, I don't know, maybe a year and a half, something like that, if even that long. And I walked into the bathroom, and he was a tub drinker, and he was laying in the tub. And I thought, poor guy. He's worked so hard. The first husband wasn't a worker. He had an allergy to work. So he's working. Tom's a worker. And I think, we got this, and, I'm going to keep him. But he worked so hard. He was tired, and, he's fallen asleep in the tub. And I really thought he'd fallen asleep in the tub. And I let the water out and filled it back up, not too high, not too hot, not too cold, just right. And at some point in the night, he came to bed, and I'm still madly in love, in lust. I don't think we fell into love. I think we fell into lust. And so, our life goes on, and then we have our daughter. We get married, and it wasn't quite like that. I got pregnant, then we got married, then we had our daughter. And he brought into this relationship 2 boys who were 5 and 7, and my first daughter, was 6. And then we have our youngest daughter is, my God, she just turned 41. How does that happen? So we literally had yours, mine, and ours. And the sad thing about that is we used our children against the other person. And it was not the loving family that I really believe we both wanted. So a couple of years pass, and oh my God, I'm at that place where we had violence in our home at one point, and my oldest daughter had to call the police and have him taken to jail to get him to stop hitting me. And our youngest daughter, was then 6 months old, and by this time, I'm just filled with loathing. I'm filled with anger. I'm filled with resentment. I'm filled with guilt. I'm filled with anxiety. I'm filled with, all those things that our book or a pamphlet, Alcoholism, the Family Disease, talks about. That was me, just absolutely in a place where I didn't know what to do with myself. I just hopeless, absolutely hopeless. But I don't know about Al-Anon yet. And I walked into the bathroom at this point and I see him in the tub. And this time I know he's not tired. I know he hasn't fallen asleep. I know that he is passed out. And so I had this thought that if I could get the local ice company to dump a load of ice in the tub, I would certainly do that, because it was beginning to be my mission in life to make him miserable. You see, I thought that's what he was setting out to do, was to make me miserable. I did not realize that he was not doing this to me. And I thought, if he's going to make me miserable, by God, I'm going to make him more miserable. And that really was my mission. And I don't know about anybody else, but I had this tendency to throw silence. In our literature, it says, I forget about our literature, but it says, there's a thing that says silence is golden. And my mother-in-law taught me this prayer, which is weird coming from my mother-in-law. But what she said, God, put your arms around my shoulders and your hands upon my mouth. And I thought, for my mother-in-law, that's pretty good. And I wished you would practice it, which she didn't, but she taught me that story, that prayer. And it was not that kind of silence. It was the kind of silence that I'm going to get you and I'm going to show you just how badly I disapprove of you, and how badly I think you messed up last night. And so that's how I showed my disapproval. It wasn't by my words. It was by that silence. And so that happens. And by this time, he's coming home. And we had to drive. We have this house that's about 16 miles north of Santa Fe, New Mexico, when we were in Santa Fe. And Tom had to drive every day from Santa Fe to our home. And there is this place, and it's right by the Santa Fe Opera, where I had lost an uncle in a drunken car wreck. And I thought, that's the spot that I know tonight, when he comes home, that he's going to go off the embankment there, and that's it. And he always made it home. And I do not know how he did, but he always did. So we have that happening, and I'm praying to a God that I really don't believe in to take his life, and God's not listening. And there's the time that he came home, and several times actually, that he came home and he passed out in the front lawn, and I looked out and I see him passed out there in the snow, and I locked the door, and I think tomorrow morning I'm going to be that woman, and it's like, poor me, and I won't have to do anything, because I didn't want to have to do anything. I wanted him to just go away. I already had been through one marriage, and it's like, my God, I don't want to have to let go of another marriage. I don't want to be a two-time loser, It's like, I don't want to be the one to end it. And so, and also I had tried to end it. I kicked him out, and he always came back. And there was the time when he said to me, Juana, he said, I see how miserable I'm making you. I see how miserable I'm making the kids. And I'll just leave. And I was like a little kid. And I was saying to him, you can't go. Because I didn't know how to live my life without him. I really didn't. I didn't know how to not be with him. He was everything I thought about. He was my obsession. As much as alcohol is the obsession for an alcoholic, the alcoholic, was my obsession. He was all I thought about. He was what I thought about, what he did, how he messed up my life. I was thinking about how drunk was he going to be when he came home. I thought about how bad it was going to be when he got home. How was he going to affect me? How was he going to affect the kids? And I told myself the biggest lie I'd ever told myself. And I think it's still the biggest lie I've ever said to myself. And that was, if people ask me what's the most important thing in your life, I would say it's my kids. And I believe that. And the truth is that it was not my kids. The truth is that the most important thing in my life was him. Because if my kids had really been the most important thing in my life, I would have not been in that relationship, but I couldn't take it or leave it. And so I walk into the bathroom about, about a year or so before he got sober. And I saw him passed out in the tub, and I thought, who would ever know if I were to shove him under? He's an alcoholic. He's a drunk. He just slid into the tub, and my hand literally started to extend itself to push him under. And then I believe I had two thoughts that I believe today were God-given. And the first thought was, some of you may remember that TV show Columbo. Columbo always figured out who did the crime. Columbo was this little cop and this detective, in this rumpled trench coat with this little hat, and he always smoking or always chewing on this cigar, and I thought, there's going to be this cop, this little Hispanic cop in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and he's going to figure out that it was me that did this, And my next thought was, and then what's going to happen to my kids? What's going to happen to my kids? Dad's dead and mom's down in the penitentiary. And I really believe today that God gave me those two thoughts, because with those two thoughts, I turned around and I never went into the bathroom ever again when I thought he might be in there passed out. I was never afraid of what he would do. I was always afraid of what I would do. Tom came home one day and he said, I'm going to get a gun just for protection, because I had this altercation with some folks. And I said, you're not going to get a gun. And I was right in his face. And he goes, just for protection. And I said, you're not getting a gun. He goes, just for protection. I said, you're not getting a gun. And it wasn't that I was afraid of what he would do. I was afraid of what I would do. I was afraid of what I was capable, because I knew the anger. And I shouldn't say I knew, because I didn't think I knew then, but there was something in me that just knew that that was not a good idea. And it wasn't for fear of what he'd do, it was for fear of what I might do. I remember Tom, it was about 6 months before he got sober. He came home after going to the doctor, and he said, the doctor told me I had alcoholic hepatitis. And he said, if I don't quit drinking, I'm going to be dead in 6 months. And I thought, I have to wait that long? I have to wait that long. So you get the picture of what I was like before coming to Al-Anon. And so the reason I tell these stories is because my disease, the family disease of alcoholism, for me, is every bit as progressive as alcoholism is for the alcoholic. I was getting worse and worse and worse, and I didn't know it. I had no idea. So when the day came that Tom went to treatment, and they said to me when they were doing the intake, they said, we're going to keep him here for like 30 days, and you have to go to Al-Anon, and we're not going to let him out. And I thought, I've been trying to get somebody to take responsibility for this guy. So if you want the responsibility for him, you can have him. And I thought, you can just keep this SOB for all I care, because I haven't had much luck in getting rid of him. So you can just you can just keep him. And I had no intention of going to Al-Anon. However, they said I did have to go to family day, and it's all about how you look, it's all about how you look. And so I needed to look good to the family, to the people doing the family day. And so I went to my first one, and they asked me if I'd gone, and I said, no, I haven't been able to go because I'm very busy. Somebody has to take care of paying the bills and going to work and taking care of the kids. And, it's like, it's not me. And they said to me there at the treatment center, we really suggest you go to Al-Anon. He cannot go home to an old idea. Now, I didn't know what they meant by that, but it didn't sound good. What do they mean by he can't go home to an old idea? And while I didn't know what that meant, I knew that I could not go to the next family day without having gone to Al-Anon, because they had to know that whatever was wrong in our home, I had nothing to do with it. He was the only one who had any fault and any blame in what was going on in our home, not me. And I just had to look like that loving, caring, supportive wife, which I certainly wasn't, And so the following week, I went to my first Al-Anon meeting, and I knew that there was no one there who could help me. As far as I was concerned, they were old housewives, they were old hippies and professional people. And these professional people, I knew, couldn't help me because I was one. And no one in my office was talking about the things that were going on in my home. No one I knew could relate. However, what happened was they said, well, they talked about God. It's like, who wants to hear that, I mean, I've been trying to forget about God for forever. But they were talking about God, and I knew that they really couldn't help me once they started that, because you ought to know better than that. And then the meeting went on, and finally, one woman asked the question, and the question was, I'm here because I need to know how to get the alcoholic in my life to stop drinking. And I thought, finally, isn't that the $1 million question that everybody wants to hear? Or the answer to the question that everybody wants? And nobody was answering. And I raised my hand, and I often say Al-Anon made its first mistake because they called on me. And I proceeded to tell them all how to get their family member into treatment and how to get them sober. Because I really thought that I had done it. I had forgotten that about 2 months prior to this, I'd woken up from a dream where it was a dream that I couldn't deny. And basically, as a result, we had a conversation, and I said a prayer, and I asked God to give me the words to say to Tom that I knew I didn't have. And I really believe in that morning I took steps 1, 2, and 3, and I didn't even know it at the time. But that's how quickly I forget. And so I'm telling them, how to get the family member into treatment, how to get them sober. And I'd forgotten. I thought I'd done it. I'd forgotten that I'd said the prayer. I'd forgotten all of that. That's how quickly I forget. And so I quit talking, and we used to clap at our meetings back then. They all clapped, and they said, keep coming back. Thank you for sharing. And what I really thought they were saying was, keep coming back. Woo-hoo! Awesome. Great. Thank you for sharing. We really need to hear what you have to say. And I thought, I will keep coming back, because I don't think the alcoholic is going to need me much once I get him home if he's sober. If he finishes these 30 days in the treatment center, and if he stays sober. And you need me. You poor, pathetic losers really need me. So I will keep coming back, because clearly I've got some wisdom. One family day under my belt, so I'll keep coming back, right? I mean, you talk about sick, man. You talk about sick. I was so sick and so I did keep coming back, and the more and more I kept coming back, the more I realized just how sick I was. Well, took Tom home, and I was scared to death to take him home once he finished that treatment at the treatment center, and the reason being. I didn't know who he was going to be, free of drugs, free of alcohol. I didn't know who he was. I only knew how to live with him drinking and using. And I didn't know who he was going to be, and I was scared to death. I was absolutely positive that after a couple of weeks of living with me, he was going to look at me one day and he's going to say, you know what? It's been a ride, babe. It's been a ride. But let me tell you, I'm done. I'm out of here. Because he was going to look at me and he was going to say, you're just not enough. You're not smart enough. You're not fit enough. You're not pretty enough. You're not witty enough. You're not rich enough. You're not skinny enough. You're not any of the enoughs. And I knew that was going to happen because I didn't think I was enough. I didn't think I was enough. I didn't think much of myself, but I tell you, I thought there was nothing to me. And while I didn't think much of myself, I was all I thought about. And what I thought about was what a sorry, pathetic human being was. So why would he want to be with me when I didn't even want to be with me? And I'm going to Al-Anon meetings. Now, what happened was I kept going to meetings. And I kept going to meetings over and over and over. I went to 3 and 4 meetings, sometimes 5 meetings a week, because that's what we had in Santa Fe. And I picked up the lingo. I sounded good. But the old timers used to say, if you don't have a program at home, you don't have a program. And I will tell you that my sounding good ended the minute I walked out of those rooms. And I did not sound in my home the way I sounded in those meetings. So I didn't have a program at home. I just had the lingo. There was nothing in my heart. There was nothing in my spirit that was truly an example that demonstrated anything of our Al-Anon principles. There's a reading that I love in June 14th of our One Day at a Time. And it goes like this. It says, if someone were to say to me, here is a medicine that can change your whole life for the better, it will put you in a state of relaxed serenity, help you overcome the nagging undercurrent of guilt for past errors, give you new insight into yourself and your spiritual value, and let you meet life's challenges with confidence and courage, would I take it? Would I take it? Here is a medicine. Al-Anon, in those 12 steps, has the medicine. And for me, the medicine was never about going to meetings. The medicine in those first years was all about how I could look to those members of the fellowship. Can I get the pat on the back? I was not taking the medicine. I didn't even want the medicine. And so when the day came on a Sunday afternoon that I was at that place where I was absolutely hopeless and desperate, and I was blessed with what I call the gift of desperation, the gift of desperation. I had nothing left. I was completely destitute in every way whatsoever. And if you think about those words, gift of desperation, the first initial of every one of those words is this, G-O-D. My gift of desperation led me to God, because I became finally at a place where I was teachable. And that week I asked a woman if she would sponsor me, because before this, I didn't need anyone. Thank you very much. I didn't need anyone. I've got all the answers. I got it. She started taking me through those 12 steps. And as she started taking me through those 12 steps, the medicine began to work. And I began to change. I had that woman as a sponsor for, I don't know, it wasn't very long, maybe 2 years. And then one day she said to me, you need to find a new sponsor. And I didn't want a new sponsor. I didn't want a new sponsor because I'm not going to tell anyone else, everything that she knows about me. I'm not going to do it. I gave her everything there was for me to know, for her to know. Nobody else was going to get that. No one. So I didn't want another sponsor. I kept showing at her house. I kept showing up at her house. Every week I'd show up at her house. And finally she said, she says, we're done. I really need you to get a new sponsor. We can't keep doing this. And she said, I'll be forever grateful for her. She said, the reason we can't is that I haven't gone past the 7th step, and I haven't gone into 8 and 9. And I will be so grateful because she didn't try to take me someplace that she hadn't been before. And I finally got a new sponsor, and it goes on and on. But I will tell you, I keep taking this medicine because when I take this medicine of the 12 steps, what I am told at the 12th step, it says to me at the beginning of this step, it says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, as a result of taking the medicine of the 12 steps, I have had a spiritual awakening. And I will tell you that every time that I've taken these 12 steps and I work these 12 steps again, I have a deeper spiritual awakening. My awakened spirit goes deeper, and my relationship with the God of my understanding deepens. And when that relationship with the God of my understanding deepens, my relationship with my husband deepens. My relationship with my sponsor, my current sponsor I've had for over 30 years now, it deepens. My relationship with my children deepens. My relationship with my friends deepens. All of my relationships get deeper. And what happens is the wall that I used to build between you and me gets thinner and comes down brick by brick. And that's not to say that I don't put up bricks from time to time. I still do. But I no longer have the desire to keep you at bay and to keep you from knowing who I truly, truly am. And one of the things these steps, taking the medicine, has done is that it has freed, believe me, it has freed Tom from being responsible for me and for my feelings and for who I am. I am responsible for everything in my life, not him, not him. And with that freedom, our relationship has changed, and all my relationships with all my kids, my family has changed. I've been given the gift of things I wasn't capable of doing, like walking my parents through the last days, the last years of their life. That was something I never wanted to do, and I was graced with the ability to do that. And there were days that I didn't think it was possible. The God of my understanding, when things come up in my life that I think this is so painful, this is so hard, this is so difficult, I don't have the ability deep within me to do this, I say a prayer and I say, God, you carry me through this because these feelings are too big. And what happens is God does. God carries me through this. I didn't know when I got here to you that I even wanted this. I just wanted the pain to stop. I just wanted to look good and have you think well of me. I didn't want any of these other things. And what I have been gifted, I thought you needed me. I needed you. I needed you to such a degree I didn't even know. I was starving for you. And I was starving for the message. And I didn't even know it. I was starving for a God that is greater than me, that can carry me through all of my life difficulties. And I didn't even know it. Didn't even know it. I have been given so much more than I ever thought I could be given. And with that, I will tell you that I'm richly blessed. And I'm richly blessed that I have a husband that has been, well, he'll tell you his story, but I'm grateful that I've had this journey of recovery, this journey. And believe me, it's been quite the journey. We've gone through our ups and downs. What we have today is so much better than I ever dreamed was possible. And that's not to say it's perfect. It's not to say it's not with its ups and downs. We have those. We have those ups and downs. But what we have today is infinitely better than I dreamed could possibly be possible. It's beyond my wildest imagination. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to my husband, Tom, and I'm going to switch over. I'm going to get up so he can have this spot. Thank you all. Love you.
good afternoon. My name is Tom. I'm an alcoholic. And Yvonne, thank you for doing this. Can you all hear me all right? Give me a thumbs up or something. Okay. By the grace of a loving God, I've been continuously sober since June the 15th of 1986. And I'm very, very grateful for that date. And I was taught early in AA that you don't be grateful, you do grateful. And hopefully my Creator knows that how grateful I am based on the actions that I've taken. And I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, not just a sober person. And I have a home group in Santa Fe, New Mexico. That's where we're from. At the moment, we're sequestered in Nashville, Tennessee, where we also have a home. But our primary home is in Santa Fe, New Mexico. That's where my home group is. My home group is simply called An AA Group. And we meet Monday nights at the Salvation Army. And we're a Big Book step group. And we read the Big Book, and then we share our experience with working the steps as outlined in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. A lot of sponsorship and a lot of service comes out of our group. And we're a wonderful, real AA group, is what I think. And and I miss my group. I'm able to tune in on Mondays, but not being there in person it's not the same thing. Here in Nashville, there's tremendous AA, and I go to a lot of meetings here and really love the AA in Nashville. So I do service work of various different types. I usually have a service commitment. And my main service work is that I sponsor guys. And I think that's the mission of both AA and Al-Anon. I think everyone ought to do it. No one is underqualified. Some people think that they can't do it, but I think that's just an excuse because they don't want to be inconvenienced and, they're scared. Anyway, so I sponsor a bunch of guys. Juanita sometimes says too many. But that, I believe, is my mission, and is to carry this message of the 12 steps and to help another suffering alcoholic to go through those steps and watch him come out the other side and help someone else. I have a sponsor. His name is Gary B. Lives in Indianapolis. And the guys that I sponsor, almost all of them sponsor other guys. We're connected. I'm not sure if Amanda is still on here. Mandy is still on here, but we're connected to Australia pretty deeply through sponsorship and just a bunch of friends. We've been there twice, and we've done a lot of stuff there. And when I was in Sydney this last October and November, we were there for 6 weeks in Australia. And a guy came up to me and he said, I want to thank you. I said, well, I don't know you. What are you thanking me for? And he said, well, if you had not done what you did with Damien, and this is my sponsee that we Skype or whatever you want to call it every Saturday. And we read the entire Big Book to him. We did all of the steps on Skype. We did his 5th step on Skype, and it was an intense experience. And he said, if you had not done that for him, then he wouldn't have done it for so-and-so wouldn't have done it for me. And you saved my life by what you did for him. And that's edifying, you guys. I mean, for a guy like me who had absolutely burned his life down completely, was an absolute loser in every department, you got to know that it's edifying to think that the actions that I take actually help someone and help to rebuild a family. So anyway, that's my MO. That's what I continue to do. So I don't have enough time to really do my story, tell you my story typically. So I'm going to have to kind of cherry pick a little bit. But I'll start from the time that I got into the treatment center. Juanita told you a little bit about that. Now, I've been putting off going to a treatment center for several years. The idea of it scared me because I had no idea what that would be like. I had no, or what I would do. I did know that I had a big problem with alcohol. Okay, I knew that for a long, long time. I've been trying to control and enjoy it, and my problem with alcohol basically was 2-part. One is when I drink alcohol, I lose control and bizarre things happen, often tragic things happen. And the other part is when I don't drink alcohol. So other than that, I don't have any problem with alcohol, just when I drink it and when I don't. But when I don't drink it, it's like the world just gets uglier and things tighten up on me. And it takes a little while, but ultimately I must take a drink again. And I always do. I always do. That's my MO. So no matter what, and no matter what the circumstances are, no matter how great the need to quit, I just don't do it. So I drank for 16 years. And it progressed. And, the fact that I'm even alive is just amazes me daily. One of the reasons I'm alive is because Juanita took good care of me. She had a decent job and she made food and like that. And had I not been with her, I would have been living on the streets. And that's just the truth of it. I had 4 children in all. And when I got into that treatment center, and when I got there, I was physically addicted to alcohol, which is not a prerequisite for alcoholism. It's just how I was. And all that means is that when you don't drink, you shake and you can't really function. Your mind doesn't work right and your body doesn't work right. And when you get a few pops in you, things level out and you can operate again. So I was physically addicted to alcohol and physically addicted to heroin at the same time. That's a bad deal. That's a bad deal because when you're like that, you don't know what to treat first. But just it's like living in hell is what it is. So I go to this treatment center not to get sober. I had tried for a good 10 years probably to try to sober up. Drank for 16, and the last 10 I worked at controlling and enjoying. And eventually I just gave up. What happened to me was I would swear off the booze. I would say, I'm never going to drink again. And I would absolutely mean it with every fiber in my being, with everything in me. I wouldn't even bother to tell Juanita because she'd heard it so many times. And I wouldn't tell my children because they'd heard this lie over and over. And so I just to myself, I would make a solemn oath that I'm done with drinking. And I feel good about my decision. And the next day I'd drive into Santa Fe, and for some reason my truck would drive up to Andy's Liquorette to the drive-up window of its own volition. Like I didn't even do that. And I'm at the drive-up window and I think, why am I here? I'm not drinking anymore. And I'd think, well, you're probably here to get a pack of cigarettes, but while you're here, get a couple of miniatures to start the vodka to start the day, and you'll quit tomorrow. And it went on and on like that. And some drinkers understand this, that's humiliating. When you can't even pull that off, when you put your best foot forward and you tripped on your best foot, and you try it again and again. And then eventually I stopped trying because I didn't like the humiliation of the failure of not being able to quit. So when I got into that treatment center, they didn't have a name for it back then, but they now call it hepatitis C. That's what I have. They knew I had liver disease. I was 130 pounds, 6 feet tall. I just looked like a walking cadaver. My 4 children were terrified of me. My wife hated me. I mean, you heard the part about wanting to drown in the bathtub, and that ain't a loving relationship, y'all, And I mean, it just things had gotten that bad. I had one friend, and that one friend was also my business partner in a little construction business that I'd pretty much run to bankruptcy. And I'd been stealing from our joint bank account, and he was about to discover that. Now, he was a combat Marine in Vietnam, and he was a rough guy. I mean, that's all there is to it. He was I think he's alcoholic. I never called him that, but he drank a lot. And he was prone to extreme violence. And I needed out of town, man. I had bad checks written all over the town, and there was no friendly direction. And that's how I got to this treatment center in the big city of Albuquerque. The reason that I was able to go there was because we didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. We lived in a beat-up trailer that we owed more money on, way more money than it was worth. But Juanita worked for the state and had a good job, and we had insurance, so I could get into this treatment center. So I go to this treatment center, and all I'm planning to do is just hang out there, get a little R&R, Santa Fe, where I know people are looking for me, and just regroup, somehow regroup. I had tried, in my quest to try to control and enjoy, I tried some psychiatry. That's where you pay money to go to a therapist and lie to them. That's how that worked. I had tried some Eastern spirituality, and I was just a dilettante at it. It wasn't even worth the try. Although I did become a complete vegetarian for 6 years, no meat, fish, or eggs for a full 6 years. And luckily for me, Camel Straight cigarettes, heroin, and Jack Daniels were all vegetables. That would have blown that scene completely apart. So that didn't work, obviously. And then the love of my family, over and over, I tried to use the love of my family to quit. My doctor told me I would be dead in 6 months, and I really respected him. He really cared for me, and he told me that. That was rough to hear. He said, "You won't see 38 years old." And then a judge had told me he'd throw me under the jail if I came before him for a violence thing, like I'd come before him. Anyway, over and over, it was just failure after failure. And I tried the heroin maintenance for alcoholism program, and that backfired terribly. And I never quit drinking, but I became a heroin addict. And then, of course, the final straw is always you got to go to A&A. Every drunk of my caliber ends up there. I went to these 2 meetings, and I just hated them. I just thought they were terrible. I thought, what a bunch of losers on a Saturday morning to have to go to this dismal place. And, I sat there to everyone, but I had a smile on my face, and I pretended like I was enjoying it. Went home and told Juanita I'd been to the classes, and now I won't drink anymore. And I didn't for 67 days. And then I did, because that's my MO. That's what I do. The worm starts turning, and I start drinking. So I knew AA was, just a bunch of losers, and that wasn't an option for me. And at one point, I was kind of a cool guy. Like I was somebody, or at least in my own mind, I was somebody. So, it couldn't be for me. Not these folding chairs and linoleum floors for the rest of my life. Not it. I couldn't work. I put it together. When I went there, it was basically so Juanita wouldn't kick me out of the house. And in my mind, I decided that Alcoholics Anonymous was a punishment for having lived a crappy life. Like you live this debauched life, and you hurt all these people. And then to make up for it, you serve a penance, and that's going to A&A for the rest of your natural life. And if you'll do that and you'll put up with the punishment, at the end, your karma will be leveled out, and you'll be okay when you die. That's something like that is what I put together. Of course, I was shooting heroin when I was going to the meeting, so it might have colored my experience a bit. Anyway, but I digress. So I get to the treatment center, and a bunch of things happen at the treatment center. I'll try to go through it quickly. About the second or third night that I was in there, what happened to me was what they call the alcoholic moment of clarity. And what happened was they were giving me anti-seizure medicine and stuff so I wouldn't get opiate sick, but they didn't give me enough to shut everything out. And I couldn't sleep, and I was up all night, and I saw my life what it had become. I absolutely saw it. I'd call myself a father, and man, I just was not in any way, shape, or form what you would call a father. I would promise my boys in Santa Fe that I would pick them up on a Friday to take them home for the weekend, and I would get to their house at 10 o'clock at night drunk, and my ex-wife would say, "Get out of here." They waited for you for hours. For hours, they sat on the stoop waiting for you. You broke their hearts again. You're drunk. Get the hell out of here. I put them to bed hours ago. And I would think about that, and I'd think, man, it's like I'm the guy that means the most to them in the whole world. And if they can't trust me, they can't trust anybody. Like I've broken their trust, and I saw that night. I'd seen it before when I would wake up in the middle of the night at home and couldn't get back to sleep. But I would drive across New Mexico with a pickup truck with 3 little bitty kids in the back of it, drinking Jack Daniels, going in and out of blackouts, hundreds of miles, and no real father would do that. And I saw that in living color that night, and I called myself a husband, and all I ever did was lie to my wife, I'd lie to her first and then try to discern if I could have told the truth. Often the truth would have worked better, but I'm always on the defensive. I'm always in the wrong. And so I just lie. And then I thought about, well, am I a friend? And I thought, you're not. You only have one friend and you've been stealing from him, and that's not a friendship. And then I would think about money that I owed, for years and years, that I'd borrowed and never paid back, and probably didn't intend to pay back. Banks that I'd run away from, loans. And this is all before computers and cell phones, when I was pulling these deals, and they couldn't find you. But I had it inside of me. So I saw all of that night, and that I wasn't a businessman. I was just a washout in every department. And I just cried all night. I just wept, and something died inside me. Something, broke inside me that needed breaking. And it didn't feel good. I had a sponsor who was the most wonderful AA that ever lived. His name was Don Pritz. And he used to say, when we talk about these spiritual awakenings, we talk about them like they feel good. He goes, but they never do. They never feel good. There's always a lot of pain that's accompanied with them, and they don't feel good. They're very uncomfortable, but they're the most meaningful thing in our lives. So anyway, that kind of set me up for what happened. And it turned out there was a little AA meeting that was coming into this place, into the treatment center, that was not part of the treatment. They were an independent AA meeting that was allowed to hold their meeting there. And I went out to the meeting. I knew AA wouldn't work, but I heard they were given real coffee with caffeine in it out there. They were serving that, and they served decaf in the hospital. I wanted a buzz at 4 days sober, and so I went to AA for the coffee, literally the truth. And it seemed like when I got there, they had changed AA. There were these two guys that just remarkable guys. They were what we call Chicanos and my kind of guys. And I listened to them and I heard their stories, and they were just remarkable. I mean, crazy stories. And so I went back every day for the stories. And then it dawned on me, man, these guys have been sober a while, and they lived at least a horrendous life as I had. And so I asked them one time, I said, how do guys like you stay sober? And they both told me the same story. They said, in the morning, we pray to God and we ask God to keep us sober. And at night, we thank God. And they really put emphasis on the thanking God at night for their sobriety. And I just felt sorry for them. I just thought, oh, yeah, well, you're Catholics, so that makes sense to you, this make-believe fairy tale thing you call God. And I know that there's no such thing. But I kept going out for the stories. And then one day, one of them said, last weekend I took my daughters to the state fair. And it occurred to me, I didn't have the wherewithal to take my children to the state fair. And this guy, this poor deluded guy that prayed to the fairy tale God, could take his children to the state fair. Okay. And so he had that much going on for him. And I thought, man, how could it hurt for me to pray to the God that doesn't exist? I mean, maybe psych myself into what he believes, And I started doing that in there. And it was weird at first, a couple of days. And about the third or fourth night that I said, thank you, God, for my sobriety, a comfort, a kind of a calm came over me. And I just kept doing that. When I got out of there, I'd been sober longer than I ever had. My personal best was 8 days. Now I had 33 days, no drugs, no alcohol at all. And so I knew to keep that up. And that's what I did. I got back to Santa Fe, and I became a meeting makers guy, like going to a lot of meetings, It was probably good for me. I got into service immediately, and I did a lot of different things especially the first 3 years. I became a counselor in a treatment center. I did a lot of stuff around Alcoholics Anonymous other than work the 12 steps of AA. Okay. And you can do that. You can stay busy. And then I met a woman who actually is now Juanita's sponsor, but she sponsored me for 7 years, and she was just a breath of fresh air, man. She was a light. She knew the big book. She knew the steps. And I did some step work with her that was really, really important. Anyway, during this time, she had to leave New Mexico and go back to Maine. And during this time, I had hit a wall just inside myself. I was about 5.5 years sober. And I'd gone to a conference, an AA conference in Roswell, New Mexico, and taken a newcomer guy down there so he could experience it. And there were speakers and this and that. And I heard a set of tapes by a guy that a taper buddy of mine gave me. And on these tapes, this guy said, if you will submit to the process that's outlined in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, you'll recover from alcoholism. And that got my attention, and then he went through all the steps and how you use the Big Book to recover, to take the steps. And but that deal of you will recover, no one said that where I live. That was a dirty word. Like, never say you're recovered, because you're setting yourself up for a slips, and you'll always be recovering. You'll never be recovered. And it's interesting. That's not what our literature says. That's not what the Big Book says. We got that, I think, from some treatment center back in the late 60s, early 70s. And it kind of became, the thing to say that, I'll always be recovering. But that's not what the Big Book says. The Big Book promises that we will recover. And I'm sitting here today, a recovered alcoholic. That's what I am. I don't drink alcohol, and I don't think about drinking alcohol. Can I be an asshole on any given day? Absolutely. You heard Juanita, that it doesn't mean that I'm a saint because I'm a recovered alcoholic, and it doesn't mean that I don't have problems. And it certainly doesn't mean that I'm cured of alcoholism. But that thing that was on me constantly, that had me, that ran my life and directed everything I did, is gone. And it's a direct result of working the 12 steps. So I met this guy, I got on that, and he directed me to a conference up in the mountains of Colorado in the summertime, in July. This was 1993. And it was the Fellowship of the Spirit Conference. It was the very first one. And as he described it to me, I said, why would I want to go to something like that? He said, well, it's the Cannes Film Festival of people who do the work from the Big Book. And I thought, damn, I got to do that. I got to go to the Cannes Film Festival of Big Book step work. And so we went up to this thing, and it just completely blew me away. It was life-changing to go to it, because the things that I heard were like nothing I had heard at home. They really weren't. And the thing I want to end this with, I've got about 15 minutes or so. The thing that really impacted me the most, the thing that impacted me the most was the love. The tears and the laughter with these people that worked those steps from the Big Book, that they weren't mean thumpers like I'd heard, but they were full of love and full of life. But the thing that impacted me the most stepwise was what I heard about the 9th step. And what these guys were saying was that you can finish, with God's help, you can finish every amend that you have. There's some way to make an amends, and God will show you how to do that. And you can get completely free and finish your amends. Now, at home, people are saying, oh, don't worry about that. That was then, this is now. Some of those might hurt you, and you don't have to do those. These people said, that's ridiculous. You absolutely have to do, if you want freedom, how free do you want to get? And if you want freedom, you need to clean up your past. And that's the only path to it, okay? When I first got sober, I talked to a guy, and I said, I committed a bunch of crimes. But fortunately, there's a statute of limitations on all those crimes. And, I'm off the hook. Like, they can't prosecute me. And he said, well, that's really great. That's good. The only problem with that is that the subconscious knows no statute of limitations. So all the stuff that you did that went against your morals and values and principles, you're carrying that inside you if you have a conscience. If you're not a sociopath, you're carrying all that with you and trying to be happy, joyous, and free without cleaning up your past. And it doesn't work. And I'm here to say it doesn't work, okay? I had trouble with a lot of stuff in my life before I made the amends. Meditation was not a good thing for me. Like, when I tried to get quiet and go into that quiet place and hit that, the texture of serenity, it never came. The quiet was not a safe place for me. There was the chatter of 1,000 monkeys in there, okay? And when I tried to work with guys, tried to sponsor guys, I couldn't really encourage them to make their amends because I hadn't finished all of mine. You see what I'm saying? And at any rate, the carrot of freedom that they dangled made sense to me, and I went after that. And I started making my amends, and I did it with a lot of help from a lot of people. We did an 8-step review where we went over every one of my amends that I was going to do to make sure we didn't do further damage. I was taught how to make the approach. I was taught to go to these people, and if they were alive, go to their graves if they weren't, but to go to them if they were alive and say, this is the harm that I caused you that I'm aware of, if you'll listen to me. And I was wrong to do that. And in many cases, I'd say you didn't deserve to be treated like that. You absolutely didn't. And is there any harm that I've left out that you need to tell me about? And then shut up and listen to them. Okay. And then after that, say, what can I now do to make this right and to even things up between us, and be willing to do whatever they ask me to do. That was a lot of currency in that, I'll tell you, in terms of freedom. I had been a traveler. I'd gone all over, and so I had to travel to make the amends. Some people say don't go see old girlfriends. I called. I made the approach. They both wanted to see me. One was in Oakland, California. One was in Connecticut, and I went back and saw both of those and cleaned that up, and it meant a lot to them. I found all the people that I owed money to, and I paid it back. And that's I could do a whole hour and a half on the amends, but the freedom that brought, and not just the freedom, if you sit there and you say, yeah, I owe them money, but I can't afford to pay them back, then the universe, which is a just universe, will say, aha, for him, there's not enough. Okay. And you'll have money troubles. You just will. And if you say, I know God has my back, I know if I do this, it's the right thing to do and God will take care of me. The universe goes, aha, for him, there is enough. And it starts to open channels. And that's happened in our life, that we're not wealthy, but money seems to come to it. It seems to go through us really more than stick, but we don't have money troubles. We absolutely don't. I think it's a direct result of making those financial amends that I went to graves of people that I had owed amends to. I went to my father's grave. I went to, my mother was still alive then. I made direct amends to her. I made direct amends to my brother, my sister-in-law, all my children, a bunch of people in business that I had done dirty. Anyone and everyone that came up. Now, occasionally things still do come up. And when they do, I'll make amends. Okay. And I know that because I've made so many. I was a sneak thief. I used to steal we have a chain of grocery stores in New Mexico called Albertsons, and they're a big chain. And back in the day, you couldn't buy alcohol legally on Sundays, but I needed booze. So I would go in there and I would boost cans of hot beer, just to get myself, to stop shaking. And I did that, and I stole food, for years I did that, and it bothered me because I wasn't raised to be a thief. And so I went into meditation and I got a number and I had to go into the Albertsons and talk to them and say, look, for years I've been stealing from you and I need to pay you back. I had a real hard time with that. The ego doesn't want us to make these amends. I'm convinced of that. At least mine does not. It wants to protect my false pride at all costs. And it doesn't want me to go in and deflate my ego by saying I was a little sneak thief who stole from you for the last 10 years and I need to pay you back. But I prayed and prayed, and I walked in the place scared to death, talked to the manager, no big deal to him, paid the money. And when I walked out, I felt like I was gliding over the pavement and tears were rolling down my face because I had experienced the direct power of God, the direct power of that we call God. I mean, undeniably. We talk about the second step and we talk about come to believe. And if you're new in one of the programs, you can't come to believe. You hope to believe. You hope that the stories these people are telling are true stories, But when you do that, when you make an amends that you didn't have the wherewithal to make, you pray and then you're able to make it. you can't deny that that power is real. And that's when you come to believe, or at least when I did. You know, I had a deal before I made the amends, and this was in the first 10 years really that I got busy with this. But I'd gone to a treatment center, and I owed a copay on that treatment center. The treatment center was in Albuquerque. I didn't even know, I'd forgotten about it, but Juanita remembered, and she told me. But here's what I did know, that when I drove past that hospital, it had become a hospital, not a treatment center any longer. But when I drove on I-25 and went past it, there was an uneasy feeling that I would get. And I've named that, I call it white noise. Okay. And eventually I had to, find them and try and pay the money. And it was a hard, tough pull. I mean, they had been in California, they no longer were, then they were in Florida. And I finally found them, and they said, "No, you don't owe any money," And I said, "Well, I know I do owe you about $1,400. And they said, "No, I see where that was here, but we wiped that off. We can't carry bad debt." I said, "Well, let me pay you." They said, "You can't. You'll mess us up." So I had to pray and pray. And eventually what happened was I met some guys in Alamogordo, New Mexico, who had a treatment center. And that was run by AAs for AAs, no federal money. They didn't take money from any other source but Alcoholics Anonymous, and from members of AA, not from the General Service Office. And I thought, well, you don't have to hit me with a 2x4. I mean, that's where this ought to go, obviously. And so I started paying it off. And eventually I ran into some of them, and they said, "Oh, the freezer man, you're the freezer man." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "We bought a freezer, a really nice freezer with that money that you paid us, and now we're able to keep things frozen, for the guys that stay here." That's one of 100 stories. There was I had a landlady in Santa Fe, and Mrs. Garcia was her name. And Mrs. Garcia lived on Garcia Street. Imagine that. And I had been there in the 70s, and I had told her that I would exchange some rent for a job of construction work. And of course, I didn't do it. I took off. But the weird thing was, when I would drive up Garcia Street, there's that white noise going, that uncomfortable feeling that I get. And I'm driving up Garcia Street, and eventually I don't go up Garcia Street anymore because I just don't want to do that. I don't want that feeling. I don't like that white noise. I had a friend who, so anyway, eventually I went to Mrs. Garcia, and I met with her, and I went through the whole spiel like we do. And she said, "Oh, I don't want you to bill me anything, and I don't want any of your money at all." She said, "But, I'd like to tell you about my relationship with Jesus." And I thought, well, that's odd. And so I stood there for 2 hours, and she told me about Jesus and her relationship and how wonderful her life was, And I thought, well, I guess that's the amends. I mean, I guess that's, I just nodded and said, that's great. I'm glad for you. And eventually a friend of mine came down from Denver, and we were talking, and we were having lunch. And I told him about that, and he said, "That's not amends, man. You owe her that money." And I said, "Well, she wouldn't take it." He said, "How long ago was it?" I said, "It was 30 years ago." He goes, "How much was it?" I said, $75. He said, "Why don't you find out what simple interest compounded over 30 years was? Go to any bank, they'll tell you that. And then put that cash money in an envelope, write for back rent, and stick it in her mailbox. You think she's going to just throw it away?" I said, "No, I guess you're right." So I went to a bank. They calculated the interest. It was $300 and some. I put exactly that amount into an envelope, put Mrs. Garcia for back rent, stuck it in the mailbox, and I'm sure that she got it. And you know what happened as a result of that? I can drive up Garcia Street, and there's no white noise at all. Our friend in North Carolina, Tom Ivester, he used to say, by making my amends, I was buying pieces of my soul back, one piece at a time. And it's absolutely true. Like, you can purchase your freedom by making those amends, by doing that. The other kind of side pieces that have come from that is I am a meditator now, and I can sit for 20 minutes and be at peace. You know, I have a mind that sometimes races, but oftentimes, man, I go to that silent place where it's all good, and you feel the texture of that serenity, you know. And I could never do that before I made the amends. I never could. So I was doing unconscionable things with a conscience that still worked. The other asset from that is that when my guys who I sponsor say, and I can't make that amends, Tom, it's just too hard. I say, look in my eyes, that amends. I did exactly, and you can too. And they know I'm telling the truth. And what I do is I encourage them to be able to do their amends. I give them courage to be able to do it. There's no better feeling on earth, you know. I believe that the ninth step is highly underrated. And one of the things I think that comes about is that we make the world a better place, because so many people I've made amends to have said to me, you know, you have renewed my faith in humankind. You absolutely have. There's no way to buy this stuff. It's not for sale, but it's for free and for fun in AA and Al-Anon. Thank you guys for having me. Love you.